In the heart of Copenhagen, as autumn winds swept across the Danish capital, European leaders gathered for what was expected to be a routine summit. But it quickly became clear that this meeting would carry far more weight. Estonia's Prime Minister, Kristen Michal, arrived with a stark warning, one that shifted the tone of discussions and reminded everyone that Europe's security remains fragile. Speaking to international journalists, Michal accused Moscow of using recent air incursions not as isolated provocations, but as deliberate distractions. According to him, the pattern is unmistakable. By breaching airspace near Poland and Estonia, the Kremlin aims to divert attention away from the urgent task of helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia's ongoing war. His words carried a sense of urgency. Putin wants to have us talking about ourselves, not about Ukraine, not about helping Ukraine. This warning resonated deeply across the summit's corridors. European leaders know that the war in Ukraine is now well into its third year, and while support for Kiev has remained strong, political fatigue is creeping into several European Union capitals. The Estonian Prime Minister's message was clear: unity must not be allowed to fray in the face of Russian provocations. Michal emphasized that the European Union cannot afford to let its focus slip. He told the press that the central message of the Copenhagen summit had to be, above all else, unity and resolve. He insisted that the main topic is and must remain Russia's aggression. For the Estonian leader, any deviation from that focus serves Moscow's strategic interest. Pointing to specific incidents, including recent airspace violations involving both Poland and Estonia, Michal described a consistent pattern of behavior. He argued that Russia has been testing boundaries, crossing borders, and provoking reactions in order to force neighboring countries to focus inward rather than continue to aid Ukraine. In his words, when you step on somebody's borders or boundaries, you try to achieve that they are more concerned with themselves. His warning suggested that these were not random or accidental incursions. They were calculated acts of distraction. To understand the weight of these remarks, it is important to recall that the Baltic region has long been one of NATO's most vulnerable frontiers. Airspace violations by Russian jets have been reported for years, often intercepted by NATO aircraft. But in the wake of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, such provocations carry a deeper strategic edge. Analysts describe them as hybrid tactics, military in appearance, but political in purpose. Michal also offered a broader reflection on Europe's own transformation in response to the conflict. He remarked that Europe, historically seen as a project of peace without arms, is now compelled to become a project of peace with arms. He described this as a miscalculation by Moscow, suggesting that the Kremlin underestimated Europe's willingness to rearm and stand together. Yet he acknowledged that democracies tend to move more slowly than authoritarian regimes. Still, he expressed confidence that the continent was moving in the right direction.
I would say on Poland's incident and Estonian airspace violation, the pattern probably is quite clear that they don't respect any boundaries. They are all the time testing these boundaries. And when you step on somebody's borders or boundaries, then you try to achieve that they are more concerned with themselves. So this is the pattern. Putin wants to have us talking about ourselves, not about Ukraine, not about helping Ukraine, not to push back Russia and Ukraine. So that is quite clear.
The Estonian leader cited concrete evidence of Europe's changing posture. Just half a year ago, he noted the EU lacked certain mechanisms to accelerate defence investments. Today, he said, Europe benefits from new tools like the so-called escape clause, which allows countries to invest more quickly in their militaries, and the SAFE mechanism, a €150 billion fund that has already been oversubscribed. These steps, Michal argued, show that Europe is stronger than it was 6 months or even a year ago, a sign that the region is adjusting to the reality of long-term security threats. Beyond the summit hall, the story of these air incursions is closely followed on the streets of Tallinn, Warsaw, and other frontline communities. For people living near Russia's borders, the issue is not abstract. Residents describe feeling a mixture of vigilance and fatigue, weary of constant tensions, yet determined to resist intimidation. This human dimension underscores why leaders like Michal push for unrelenting focus on Ukraine's defence. They see their own security as tied to Kiev's survival. The Copenhagen summit itself reflected these concerns. European Union leaders arriving under tight security signalled their intent to reaffirm support for Ukraine and to address how to counter Moscow's ongoing attempts at destabilisation. Behind closed doors, debates focused on not only military aid, but also the political challenge of sustaining unity among 27 nations with diverse priorities and domestic pressures. Experts in Brussels and beyond argue that these airspace violations are part of a wider hybrid campaign, one that seeks to undermine European solidarity by stirring political divisions at home. By forcing countries to respond to direct provocations, the Kremlin hopes to distract them from the broader task of supporting Ukraine and countering Russian aggression. History looms large over these discussions. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan left many European militaries overstretched and underfunded. The last decade saw defence budgets in decline and security policy often overshadowed by economic concerns. But the invasion of Ukraine changed that calculation. Europe is now in the midst of its most significant military build-up in decades, a transformation that leaders like Michal believe must continue. This shift has not been without challenges. Democracies often move slowly, as policies must be debated and approved by parliaments and publics. Yet, as Michal noted, progress is being made. He expressed confidence that Europe's resolve, though sometimes delayed, is ultimately stronger than Moscow anticipated. The symbolism of this shift is visible in Europe's growing defence cooperation, joint procurement of ammunition and weapons systems, expanded NATO deployments on the continent's eastern flank, and new funding mechanisms all represent tangible steps toward a more coordinated European defence strategy. For Michal, these are not merely policy changes, but evidence that the continent is learning to defend itself collectively in the face of ongoing threats. As the summit in Copenhagen unfolded, there was a recognition that unity remains Europe's greatest strength and its most vulnerable point. Russian tactics aim precisely at exploiting differences, whether over migration, energy costs, or defence spending. By keeping Europe divided, the Kremlin hopes to weaken support for Ukraine and reduce the effectiveness of sanctions and military aid. Michal's remarks served as a reminder that the conflict in Ukraine is not confined to the battlefield. It is also a battle for attention, narrative, and cohesion. The Estonian leader argued that every airspace violation, every provocation is a calculated move in this broader contest, a contest that Europe cannot afford to lose.
Because Europe was a project of peace, but without arms. But right now, Europe will be a project of peace, but with arms. So it's a big miscalculation on the Russian side. But it will take time, because Europe has its own differences. We are somewhat slower in certain questions. Democracies usually are slower than dictatorships, but we will get there.
The wider context also includes the Baltic Sea region's strategic significance. As NATO strengthens its presence there, the stakes rise. Military analysts point out that even minor incidents in this region risk escalation if not managed carefully. Hence, unity and clear communication among allies become essential not only for military effectiveness, but also for crisis management. Public opinion in Europe reflects this complex reality. While many citizens support continued aid to Ukraine, there is growing concern about the cost, economic, social and political. Leaders like Michal therefore face the dual challenge of maintaining external focus on the conflict and sustaining domestic consensus for long-term engagement. The Copenhagen summit, though not expected to produce dramatic new policies, was seen as a moment to reaffirm Europe's commitment to Ukraine and to signal to Moscow that the continent will not be easily distracted or divided. Statements from participating leaders highlighted the need for both immediate support to Kyiv and long-term investment in European security. As the day drew to a close, the symbolism of the gathering was unmistakable. The flags of Estonia, Ukraine and the European Union fluttered together outside the summit venue. For Michal and like-minded leaders, that image captured the essence of Europe's challenge to hold firm, united in the face of provocation and pressure. In his parting words to journalists, Michal reiterated that Europe must never lose sight of the real threat. The provocations, he said, are designed to pull attention away from Ukraine, to make nations focus on themselves rather than on resisting Russian aggression. But he expressed optimism that Europe's response is growing stronger with each test. The story unfolding in Copenhagen is not merely about air incursions or summit declarations. It is about the struggle to maintain focus, unity and resolve in a conflict that has reshaped Europe's security landscape. For the Baltic states, for Poland and for all of NATO's eastern flank, These challenges are immediate and existential. As the summit concluded, the question that lingered over the city's historic streets was whether Europe can sustain this focus in the months and years ahead. Michal's warning that distractions are part of Russia's strategy serves as both a caution and a call to action. In the end, the narrative from Copenhagen was clear. Europe's unity is as vital as any weapon sent to the front lines of Ukraine. The battle is not only being fought in the trenches of the Donbass, but also in the halls of European capitals, where decisions about funding, arms and solidarity determine the continent's future security. For many observers, the Copenhagen summit will be remembered not for dramatic breakthroughs, but for its stark reminder that distraction can be as dangerous as division. Leaders like Kristen Michal see it as their duty to keep Europe's eyes on the real threat, the one posed by Russia's ongoing aggression and hybrid tactics. As dusk settled over Copenhagen and delegates departed, one message remained at the forefront. Europe's strength lies in unity, and that unity must withstand both the physical incursions of fighter jets and the psychological incursions of distraction. Only then can the continent hope to support Ukraine effectively and secure its own peace in the years to come.
And support to Ukraine, what would you like to say?
That also indicates certain limits to systems that. So I would say unity, resolve to back up Ukraine and never to let us be distracted on the main topic, which is the problem with Russia and to deal with Russia's threat. I would say on Poland's incident and Estonian airspace violation, the pattern probably is quite clear that they don't respect any boundaries. They are all the time testing these boundaries. And when you step on somebody's borders or boundaries, then you try to achieve that they are more concerned with themselves. So this is the pattern. Putin wants to have us talking about ourselves, not about Ukraine, not about helping Ukraine, not to push back Russia and Ukraine. So that is quite clear calculation, because Europe was a project of peace, but without arms. But right now, Europe will be a project of peace, but with arms. So it's a big miscalculation on Russian side. But it will take time, because Europe has its own differences. We are somewhat slower in certain questions. Democracies usually are slower than dictatorships. But we will get there. Because let's say half a year ago, we didn't have the escape clause, which is helping, for example, many countries to invest much faster in defense. We didn't have the safe mechanisms, 150 billion, which is already oversubscribed. And we didn't have this kind of ideas that we should do things together. So right now, I would say that Europe is much stronger than it was 6 months or 1 year ago. So I would say we are moving in the right direction, but still.